Closed for the season, Chapter 9. The next morning, Arthur showed up again at breakfast time. Bear followed him in and was sniffing around the door to the basement as he wandered around the kitchen. I was glad Mom was in the living room arguing with Dad about what color to paint the house. If she'd seen that dog, she would have concluded he smelled Mrs. Donaldson's blood. Without waiting for me to finish my cereal, Arthur plopped himself down in a chair and leaned toward me. "I've been thinking about that money," he said. "Didn't your dad say there's a ton of stuff in the attic that belonged to Mrs. Donaldson?" I nodded. "Johnny's supposed to haul it to the dump today or tomorrow." Arthur crammed some cereal in his mouth and chewed thoughtfully. "Maybe we should have a look in the attic before it's too late." I knew Mom and Dad wouldn't want Arthur and me rummaging through the attic, but they were still in the living room, too busy arguing to notice what we were up to. With Bear behind us, we tiptoed up the steep, narrow steps. Boy, must have been 150 degrees in that attic. The air was thick and heavy and smelled of dust and old things, paper and cardboard, wood and cloth. Dim light shone through the cobweb-covered windows at either end. In the middle of the floor, I saw at least a dozen big, bulking cardboard cartons. It was obvious that someone had gone through every one of them. Worn-out shoes and clothes had been flung everywhere, along with books and records, dented pots and pans, photo albums, old bank statements, ragged towels, and torn sheets. A broken lamp lay on its side in the shadows under the eaves, along with an armchair, its upholstery clawed to shred by cats. A china closet with a cracked glass door stood in the corner. One rusty roller skate sat on the stack of yellowing newspapers and magazines. "Get a load of these," Arthur laughed as he held up a huge pair of plaid boxer shorts. "Mr. Donaldson must have been as big as an elephant." I laughed too, but then I felt sad because the man had died a long time ago and never dreamed that his wife would be murdered in their house, and their two kids would make jokes about his underwear. Uneasy about looking at dead people's things, I sat back on my heels and wiped the sweat off my forehead. The money's not here. Arthur didn't answer. He was watching Bear nose through a box of old kitchen stuff, whimpering and whining to himself. "What are you after, boy?" he asked the dog. For an answer, Bear trotted over to Arthur and dropped a small plastic bag at his feet. Wagging his tail, he barked once. Arthur dumped the bag's contents onto the floor. Out tumbled a handful of junky plastic toys, each about 2 inches tall. Some were red, some were blue, some were yellow, but they were all the same. 11 gingerbread men with smiling faces. "They're from the Magic Forest gift shop," Arthur said. I used to have lots of them. Snow White, the Crooked Man, Humpty Dumpty, the Dish and the Spoon, even the Witch. But I sold them at one of Grandma's tag sales. All I got was a lousy quarter for the whole bunch. He arranged the little gingerbread men in a row. "I should have kept mine," he said, "but by the time I'm grown up, they could have been worth a fortune on eBay." I picked up a crumpled piece of paper that was on pink paper. "This must have fallen out of the bag." Arthur snatched it from my hand, squinting to make out the handwriting. The letter read, "Dear Violet, when that money was embezzled from the Magic Forest, I had an idea who took it, but I never said anything to the police because I didn't have a shred of proof. I'm afraid to write his name, but while he was at lunch today, I searched his office. They're shutting the park down in a few days, and I knew he'd clean out his belongings. It was my last chance to prove that he took the money, not me. I searched the filing cabinet, the desk drawers, and last of all the coat closet, and there it was, stuffed way back on a high shelf where nobody else would notice it, a briefcase with his initials on it. I'd seen it before, but not for a while. It was full of money, more money than I had ever seen, more than I had ever imagined can be in one place, like something you'd see in a movie but not in real life. There was no place to hide the briefcase in that ticket booth, and I was scared someone would see me carrying it out of the park. Since nobody was around just then, I hid it where we used to play the finding game with the little plastic gingerbread men. I hope you remember. It's safe there for now. I plan to go back and get it when there's no one around to see me. If he notices it's gone before I go to the police, he might suspect I took it. So if anything happens to me, get the briefcase. Whatever you do, don't tell Silas until you've given it to the police. And don't be scared. And don't be scared of you-know-who. She's just..." Arthur dropped reading and peered at me, his eyes huge over the rim of his glasses. "Go on," I said impatiently. That's all. He handed me the piece of paper. It's dated the very day that Mrs. Donaldson was murdered. I read the note closely in case Arthur had left anything out, and he hadn't. Do you think the killer came while she was writing this? He must have. Arthur's voice dropped to a whisper. That's why she didn't finish it, or even sign it. He picked up one of the gingerbread men and studied its smiling plastic face. The embezzler murdered her, he said in a low voice, and then he ransacked the house, but he didn't find this bag. Even if he saw it, he would have thought that it wasn't important. Just a little plastic bag from the magic forest. Arthur reread the note. If we find the briefcase, he said, then we'll know who killed Mrs. Donaldson. We stared at each other. The attic was so quiet. I could hear a fly buzzing against one of the small windows. It was almost as if Mrs. Donaldson was watching us from the shadows, hoping we'd bring her murderer to justice and clear her name once and for all. What do you think she meant by the finding game? Arthur shook his head. I have no idea. And why did she write, don't be scared of you-know-who? He shook his head again. For once, he didn't have the answer. While I reread the note, searching for hidden meanings, Arthur moved the gingerbread men into various formations, as if he had hoped to break a code somehow. If he lined them up just right, the answers to our questions would be revealed. These little guys must have something to do with it, he mused. But what? Shh, I whispered. Someone's coming up the stairs. Arthur scooped up the little men, dropped them back into the plastic bag along with the note, and stuffed everything deep into his cargo shorts. At the same moment, Bear ran to the top of the attic steps and began to bark. Arthur grabbed the dog's collar and pulled him away. Just as Dad stepped into the attic, Bear stopped barking, but he kept up a low growl. Johnny followed Dad, and behind him, I was shocked to see Billy, looking as surly as ever. What are you boys doing up here? Dad asked. It's hot enough to roast a turkey in this attic. Billy looked as if he wanted to know what we were doing. Without his sunglasses, his eyes were small and squinty and were set way too close together. He looked both stupid and mean, a very bad combination. I nodded my head toward Billy. How come he's here? I asked Dad. You said Johnny was hauling the stuff away. I glanced at Billy while I spoke. He was staring at me as if I were a bug that he wanted to step on. Dad gave me a puzzled look. I can't imagine why you want to know, he said, but Billy has a truck and Johnny doesn't. Brushing the sweat out of his eyes, he added, unless you want to help get rid of this stuff, go outside and find something else to do. For a second, I considered telling Dad exactly what kind of guys he had hired, but I decided against it. Maybe I'd tell him later, when Billy and Johnny wasn't standing there, looking big and bad and tough. With Bear on our heels, Arthur and I dashed down the steps, raced through the house, and sped out the back door. Get your bike, Arthur said. We're going to the library, and after that, we'll look for Violet at Walmart.